Hi everyone, Mychal Bryan here. And today, for the first time ever, I am starting a series of interviews with leaders and teachers from within the field of yoga and mindfulness-based disciplines. And today I have the wonderful, esteemed privilege to be sitting here with my mentor, my teacher, my guiding light in so many parts of my own life, Dr. Lois Steinberg. Lois, thank you so much for being here.
I'm not a medical doctor.
But you're a doctor, so we have to say it.
Philosophy, okay. I don't want people to be confused.
No, so Lois is a doctor of philosophy, a doctor all the same. And Lois, I'm really grateful for having you here on the show today.
I'm glad to be here.
Okay, now please, if you haven't done so already, like and subscribe to this YouTube channel so that you can be a part of the momentum and the mindfulness that we're building right here. Now, Lois, I am really thrilled to have you because you have been a major part of my own life and my own growth as a person, but also as a practitioner of yoga over the several years of me knowing you. And it's really exciting to be able to sit down with you and talk to you, not even about anything in particular, but more so about your own life and journey with Iyengar Yoga. So Lois, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what your journey has been, and how it is you came to be an Iyengar Yoga teacher?
Okay, who am I? I'm fluid. Well, in terms of like a biographical history, if you want the nuts and bolts, I was always very active and you know, as a kid was able to, you know, run around and play. There were no fences. We didn't have helicopter parenting back then where everything was overscheduled. And I was kind of a tomboy, I guess, but only because I wanted to do what my brothers were doing, playing baseball in the field. And I even helped mow that field, but I wasn't allowed to play because I was a girl. So I would sit in the tree. I climbed the tree and would just watch from above. And then at times my mother, in some ways ahead of her time, although she was also very, I don't know how to put it, you know, just discriminating against, you know, what roles boys and girls play. She did, though, march out and tell the boys that they had to let me play. So I was always into, you know, physical activity. And then I would say my first formal education, physical education, was in the third grade. We had this amazing physical education teacher, Mr. Gregory. And in third grade, he created this before school activity building, and then during school PE, and after school team sports. So I had physical activity 3 times a day as part of the education in the school systems back in the day when they were funded. Not even PE, that, you know, it's a joke. They closed all that down. But I got the idea that training your body was part of your education from Mr. Gregory. And he was serious, you know, he was out there in the field making lanes, and he had a starter gun, you know, and we, you know, did the 50-yard dash, and we, you know, we were outside all the time, and long jumps and high jumps and field hockey, where I got a nice crack on my head here. And during PE, we worked on all these activities, and after school, we always played team sports. And it was great. In our school, during the time, it was like the Kennedy era. Well, very at the end, because then I was in first grade when Kennedy was shot. Everybody my age knows where they were. It was coming back from recess. and Debbie Hanley announced it to everybody. One of my grade school colleagues in grade school announced it. So, but Kennedy had also this physical education. I mean, he also had developed arts and, you know, the importance of art education for helping people develop. And then our school happened to win more of these like awards that you would get through this program that he developed. So like, you know, I got the one grade the first time, I got the bronze and the silver, then the gold, then the presidential award, you know, and then came junior high and that was all squashed, as now it's called middle school. And that was all squashed. And, you know, because middle school is a horrible place. You're put in your own little island to work out all your hormones with everybody else. And I had an abusive, I didn't know it at the time, but we had a woman that we all feared as the PE teacher because she would come into our shower. We had this group shower room. We had to shower as a group. Wow. And would want to see us soaped up and wait for her to come in to touch us to make sure we use soap.
Wow.
Yeah, that was intense. So I ended up hating, you know, that.
Yeah.
Then came high school and I joined this physical education activity program. So from my first year in high school, you were trained to coach. You were trained to coach so that by senior year you can lead PE classes. And I feel like Mr. Gregory was my first guru, and, you know, the importance of, you know, being disciplined, because he was a strict disciplinarian. During the day, the PE class, we had to stand on our number. I was number 28, and he, you know, would say number 28, and I'd have to step forward here and step back. And, you know, I think he must have been in the Army or the Navy or something. And he was very strict, but you knew you were loved and cared for. You know, there wasn't, you know, that strictness. I always responded to that strict teacher, you know, and he cared about you. And I was surprised. I went off to college. I was visiting home during my college years, and I was walking through the school parking lot because the school was close to where I lived. And there was Mr. Gregory. He's like, "Hi, Lois, how are you?" I guess I looked the same. When I go to my high school reunion, they always say, "You look the same." That would be nice. But he you know, remembered, he really cared. And so he was my first development of my mind and my spirit, you know. And even though it was like in the context of Western, you know, physical education. And then I think that, okay, just forget that junior high school experience. Where we even had to do square dancing, which I did for my 60th birthday. Everybody's like, "Ooh, I don't want to do square dancing." I was like, "We got to do this." So, but then learning to coach and teach, I think, was a skill, you know, that got imprinted early. Mm-hmm. And then in college, I took gymnastic courses, and we had Mr. Hayasaki. He was world renowned in his heyday and as a coach here. And I wasn't good. I did make it up to a back handspring with help, but maybe I did it once. I did like the balancing, and I always was attempting cartwheels on it and somersaults. But so I was always into that.
Right.
And while I was in that gymnastics gym, I also jogged. I also was a runner. I started running when I was in college. And I didn't just jog, I ran. I like to, there was a clock and it was 15 times around just to make a mile. And I wanted to do that, under a certain amount of time, under 7 minutes or 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And the track ran around the gymnastics gym. And one day, let me back up. I have to back up. One of the most important things I missed.
Is this going to be about you watching Lilius as a child?
Exactly. So when I was 14, now this is revealing to the world. I really want to become flexible because I wasn't flexible. I was always stiff. I have a muscular body. I was always tight. And here we go. I wanted to make the pom-pom team. All right. And no freshman in the history of the pom-pom team at Niles North High School in Skokie, Illinois, which was 80% Jewish, never had a freshman make the team, okay?
Wow.
And you had to do the cartwheel. I had the cartwheel down, but I had to do the splits. And I wasn't flexible. So I was always an early bird, and I would go into the living room, turn on the TV, and watch Soupy Sales. People my age would know who Soupy Sales was, but never mind. Soupy Sales wasn't on one day. And on public TV, there was Lilius.
Wow.
Lilius Yoga and You. Lilius full on. She's still alive today. Now I feel like Lilius conducting online classes, although it wasn't interactive. And she was beautiful. She had this black, thick braid that was braided down one side of her body. And it was black and white. And then when we got a color TV, finally, we were the first family on the block to get a color TV, only because our Uncle Marvin stole it. He's out of prison now somewhere, but he spent a long time in prison, Uncle Marvin. But we got the color TV from Uncle Marvin. We didn't ask questions. And the red Cougar convertible. I started driving when I was 14. That was from Uncle Marvin as well.
God bless Uncle Marvin.
He's not a good person, actually. He did some horrible things. But anyway, so then she was wearing a red leotard in color. And I loved it. I just loved it. And I just started doing it every day. And I got flexible. And I didn't really know anything about the yoga except from Lilius. And in college, I kept practicing. And I met a friend, Tim Lear, who he was my best friend. And he was unfortunately killed in a car accident at a very young age. But he knew I did yoga, and he did yoga, and he got me light on yoga.
Wow.
And the two of us would look at it together and turn the pages, and we would just be cracking up. This man doesn't have a spine. How is that possible? And I had no idea, because in light on yoga, I think he's I don't know, maybe 58 or something in those pictures. And it's I thought he was dead, because to me, as a youngster, he looked like an old man, and surely he was dead already, because that was published in 1966. And this was late 70s. And then my friend took me to a yoga class, but it was just at a place that I ended up teaching at, renting a space in a church. But she was up there on this stage saying, "Now follow me." And I just thought, well, but she's not telling us anything. Why do I go? I have my own practice. Why should I go?
Mm-hmm.
She's not doing anything that floated my boat. I didn't learn anything. So I continued with the book, and I continued to jog. And then one day I was running in this 15 times around track for 1 mile, and down in the pit on the gymnastics mat was a woman who was doing a beautiful head balance.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, why is her head balance like that? How did I can't do it that way. I go up, I fall down, and I can't hold it so beautiful and steady. There was a beauty to it. So I went down and talked to her, Robin Kyle Nichols, my first Iyengar Yoga teacher. She was from California, as they all were back then. Only the fruits and the nuts did yoga. And she said, oh, well, you know, my teacher, he's in California where I'm from, and he went to study with B.K.S. Iyengar in India. And I'm like, what? I have his book. You mean that man's alive? And so then I went with her over spring break to study with her teacher. I, you know, just loved it. And then the two of us started practicing together every morning. Then there was a third person, and we had the book, and we would go to her place, which had orange shag carpets. I wish I could pull up that photo of me on the orange shag carpet in my hairy armpits in Pada Shirshasana. So we practiced like in a triangle, and we would consult the book all the time, and we would look at the pictures and try to dissect it. And then we found out about the teachers. Well, then we found out B.K.S. Iyengar was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which at the time, Jimmy Carter was president, so it took 7 hours to get there because he lowered the speed limit to 55 to save gas and told everybody to wear sweaters, which got him right out of the office. That was the best president. Anyway, so we drove to Ann Arbor, Michigan, studied with these teachers. We missed B.K.S. Iyengar there, but we studied with these teachers, and I went all the time, you know, as much as I could. All my free time, I was driving 7 hours to Ann Arbor, Michigan, bringing my dog with, because, you know, I had nobody to take care of my dog. And that was the hotbed of Iyengar Yoga in the Midwest. And then after 5 years of that, I went to Puna. I had just lost my job. I was working for the state of Illinois as a mental health specialist. This is also bringing Kennedy back into the picture. He also funded mental health care during his presidency and started up, you know, tried to deinstitutionalize these large, horrific institutions. And so I worked in this small facility that tried to get small kids who are going to be permanently locked up for the rest of their lives if we didn't intervene. We got the bottom of the barrel cases. And I was also, before that, doing social work right out of college, working for Department of Children and Family Services, which is also trying to help people at the very bottom, you know, did that too, which, you know, the horrific experiences actually. And I mean, but it was good work for me because I felt like I could help people best I can within a broken system. But anyway, during all this, I was always doing yoga. Yoga was always there. It was always my base. And then Reagan came into power and cut mental health seriously, and I lost my job. The unfortunate thing was they were deinstitutionalizing, but not building up community places. That's what I was part of, like a community place. We were working with community health centers, but that all got cut. And then, you know, then you start seeing people out on the streets. We can go back to Reagan for that, although it was started before that, because I don't think Johnson actually funded mental health very well. But I don't know. I'm just giving some context to my life.
Right.
What was going on during these times. And so I was out of a job for a year, and I just wanted to go to India. It took a while for me to get accepted there because actually, you know, there were always, you know, human beings are always political, there's always problems. But, you know, for me, it just built my character. At the time, because when I wrote to Guruji wanting to come, he said, yes, you can come, send my letter to the people in California who are sponsoring an intensive. And I wrote them, but because I wasn't from California, I couldn't get in. And all the Californians, those fruits and nuts, were always hogging all the spaces in the intensive courses. And I lost my job, so I thought, I'm going to India for a year. But I couldn't get there. I don't know why. I should have just gone. But it turned out when I was calling up my teacher, Susie Vidri, and who's still alive today in Ann Arbor, Michigan at the time, she lived there. she said, yes, we heard about what the Californians do, and we're going to have a Midwest intensive course, and you're going to be in. So I got in, and I also wrote, you know, can I please stay the year after? So I arrived in Puna, and the rest is history. So that's the context of how I came to yoga, in the sense that I was always a physical being, and then the work I chose was also a work like where I was trying to, I was always into helping work, helping people, you know, and my experiences working for Department of Children and Family Services, I actually was in the teenage unit, and, you know, at the time, my caseload was 150 cases. Like today, I think they have a caseload of 30, for context of how hard it was. I was always trying to, you know, help these people, and it was really hard to, you know, I had to appear in the courts before a judge, who, you know, and there's always the judge who handled like school truancy was just really, really horrible person. Well, at least in my opinion,
Yeah.
in terms of helping these kids. It's I don't know why I'm going into this. Just in as example, I was, you know, we have our own, like, we call it the North End. We have our own North End here. In Chicago, it was the South Side. And in here, it's the North End, where people of low economic level live. And in fact, I'm kind of going all over the place, but I learned, I took a sociology course where I learned what they taught at the time in the context of the theory of anomie, which is, do you know what that is? Because you're smart. Nope. It's just where there's social chaos. There's no like rules that people follow. And that had to do with inner city living. So being second generation, my grandparents came from Eastern Europe, the shtetls, as they were called, slums. And when they came here, they landed in Chicago, and the Jews lived on the west side and the south side of Chicago, okay, because that was the lowest income area that you could afford. And at the time, there were places that would say on buildings, no Jews or dogs allowed, okay? Wow. So you're only allowed here. And that area has a history. It has a history because, you know, it used to be like Italians and, you know, whatever immigrant group would come. Now, you know, right after the Civil War, I know there was a migration north. And even before that, to, you know, because slaves worked in growing the cotton or making fabric. So making fabric was in the north. So they would go there too for work. But after the Civil War, there was more of a migration, and even more so in about the 50s, 1950s. You know, my history could be screwed up, but they also moved into this neighborhood. But then by that time, Jews moved out and found their own place, Skokie, Illinois.
And that's how you were born, in Skokie, Illinois.
Right. No, I was actually born on Lawndale, and I lived on Lawndale Avenue for 1 year. And in fact, I had this college roommate. She came from the West Side. Okay, and I drove her home one day. This was in college. I drove her home one day. I was dropping her off, and then I'd go to Skokie, you know, for a family visit. And she told me all these stories of her upbringing. And when we're driving her through her neighborhood, she would say, "This is where I found the dead body on top of my car. Oh, that's the place I got raped with a gun. And then this is a place where blah, blah, blah." Yeah, that's what, you know, it's an area of anomie, normlessness. And so when we get to her house, she's like, "Would you like to come in?" Like, no, I think I'll go on. So here, when I was doing social work, I worked in the North End, and I actually felt comfortable, and I could feel their needs. But then with the system, everything I would try to do especially with this judge who would throw the kids in jail for just being truant in school. Horrible. And here's the thing, one time, many decades later, I had a cat that disappeared, and I was searching for him, and I got a phone call. It was the judge from like 25 years before or something, or 30 years before.
What did he do?
Yeah, he had the cat. He was taking care of him for a few days. The cat just moved in, and it was far from my neighborhood. I have no idea how my cat got there. And I had to go and pick him up, and I had to like put on like, oh yes, I know you, Judge. The cat didn't even want to leave. He didn't care. I felt bad taking him. So I'm digressing a lot. I always was helping. I was in helping professions.
Yeah.
And a lot of my experience, I think, helped me and led me to also therapeutics. Because when I went to Puna, I really, really wanted to learn therapeutics.
So Lois, before we get there, so you said that your first time to Puna, you spent 1 year as your thing. You hadn't been there for an intensive or anything. It was just the year period.
I went, and the first 3 weeks, I started with the intensive for 3 weeks. And then I took general classes. I lived in the institute.
Wow.
At the time, they have on the main level, their lobby, they have 4 rooms, and I lived in room number 2.
Wow.
And when everyone left, I was the only one living there because people didn't stay at the time. There were a few of us foreigners, but it wasn't, on anybody's radar to stay the year. They only came for 3 weeks, took the intensive, and went home. And there were some of us who took the public classes. Yeah.
So how do you think that initial formation in Iyengar Yoga formed and molded your perspective as an Iyengar Yoga teacher who would not be staying in India, but who would essentially be coming back to the West to teach Iyengar Yoga?
Well, first of all, I didn't want to leave. I wasn't having a plan of ever coming back. I loved it. Second of all, the time. Yoga was not what people did or even what they knew about. So, let alone the idea of teaching. Okay, I had no intention of being a yoga teacher. And people my generation, my colleagues, went through the same thing. Nobody wanted to be a yoga teacher. And so I was still on a trajectory. I was going to go to graduate school. That was my plan. And it had to do with when I was working at the locked up mental institution for little kids, I saw that they were all on Ritalin, and they were also on anticonvulsant medications for seizures, greater than the proportion of the general population. Why are they all locked up here? And I started taking graduate school courses because at the time of working for the state, I could take courses here. I live in a university town for free. So I wanted to take, I had this idea about nutrition. So this is another, let me back up to my developmental history, my arrested development. My mother never cooked. And so I grew up with a very bad diet. My grandmother cooked chicken soup for Friday night with matzo balls, but that was it. But I never even learned to cook from her. And my father cooked, but my father died when I was 9 years old. So that was that. We had the candy drawer and boxed cereal that I grew up on. And I grew up on sugar. And a lot of us grew up on sugar, but I really grew up on sugar. And when I came to college, this friend of mine that I mentioned, Tim Lear, who did the yoga and gave me the book, would invite me over for dinner. And he was cooking from the Vegetarian Epicure, which was like the book for people. He was vegetarian. I had no idea what vegetarianism is. I didn't even ask, oh, you're vegetarian. I didn't know what it was. I didn't ask. Okay, you're vegetarian. I was actually, during college, I worked, and I worked in a hospital in the basement. They put nutrition in the basement there, for the food service for the hospital. And I was sitting with a group of people, and they were all townies, and I was the foreigner. And they were talking about me in front of me. They were arguing because at that time I'd already become vegetarian, and they're like arguing. She's vegetarian. No, she's Jewish. So, I didn't know what good food tasted like. I didn't know what fresh food tasted like. My mother did cook fish, but I ended up hating fish because she would we would have this smoked fish, which is also a very Jewish kind of delicacy, I guess. And I guess I ate it, but then one day I remember this so well. She decided she could just throw this fish on my plate, smoked fish, and I could debone it myself now. I was of an age where I could debone it myself. And I looked at it, and that eye of the fish looked back at me, and I walked away from fish forever. So I was a non-pescatarian from very early on. And then I had these great dinners, and I'd be like, wow, this is great. Oh my God, and so he kept inviting me over for all these meals. But then I was also a neophobia of food. So I was a neophobe, but at some point I'm like, oh, what is this? And he would tell me, like, I don't eat that, Like I never ate cheese. I hated cheese because we only had like American craft cheese on Wonder Bread. And so he stopped telling me what was in the food. Then I had this boyfriend. So I started to try to learn to cook, and I had this boyfriend when I was for my 19th birthday. I still have the cookbook. It's here, I have it right here. What is it called? Just a sec.
Okay.
So I have this cookbook. Oh, The Vegetarian Epicure. The Vegetarian Epicure.
Wow.
From my then boyfriend. And I started to cook, but I'd have to call my friends up while I'm trying to look at a recipe. And I'd say, what's boiling? Like, what does boiling mean? What does simmer mean?
Wow.
I remember one time cooking up a dish of mushrooms. I think they weren't just usual button mushrooms. They were some kind of mushroom, that I'd never eaten in my life before. And God, I can't remember. They weren't portobellas. But name me some mushrooms.
There's
shiitake.
There's shiitake, yeah.
It was shiitake mushrooms. I cooked them up, and I started eating all these mushrooms, and I got high. I got high from eating. I couldn't believe it. It never happened again. But I definitely got high the first time I ever ate shiitake mushrooms. When I started cooking, then I went nuts with cooking. And I wasn't vegetarian yet until I was hitchhiking around Europe back in 1977 when it was safe to do it, more or less. And I stayed, that's a hitchhiking around Europe. I have so many stories from that. But anyway.
I remember.
Okay, I'm not going to tell it now. But I was staying in a place for 2 weeks where they didn't eat any meat or fish or anything with eyes or parents. And so I did that. I was like, I feel good. Like, oh. And so then I stopped eating meat for the rest of my life. And so I had that aspect, but these were all secondary to like my idea of I wanted to combine like my psychology degree with nutrition and help people with drug nutrient interactions. And so that was my idea. And I was going to have a wellness center that involved taking care of your body on all different levels, psychologically, food-wise, what you are, what you eat, and yoga-wise. And so I went to India, and my plan was to come back and go to grad school, which I did. But at the time, my advisor didn't really do the research that I was interested in, so it went into another direction. But when I started grad school, I also I still had to work because I got a teaching assistantship to teach yoga in Department of Kinesiology, and I also got a research assistant. But I also wanted to continue to keep my finger in the pie with social work. And so I went back to Department of Children's Family Services, and they hired me as an advocate to work with families and kids. And so meanwhile, it took me 9 years to get my graduate degree because I was doing so much work. I was working 17-hour days, basically. I made myself very unhealthy. My office was a basement without windows. And every time I finished a research project, I would go to India for 4 months or so. So I still went to India during that time. And when I finished after 9 years, I was a broken person, and I went to India for a year again. And during, backing up in terms of teaching, getting back to where I met the woman in Head Balance and we started practicing, she started teaching just out of her apartment, just the two of us kind of. And then we started to go bigger, and we would look for empty rooms on campus and just push chairs aside. And we were much more open and free then. And we would have announced with posters, class. We even put a poster on the food co-op. We had a food co-op back then about yoga. And at the food co-op, somebody wrote devil worship over it. So we had to do a lot of demonstrations. The churches were very accepting of our demonstrations. We went to the malls and, we did that trench work, before we could even have a place to teach or students. We had no students. People didn't know what yoga was. So one day when we were practicing, Robin said to me, okay, you're going to teach us in our little small threesome, Trikonasana, tomorrow. You're going to study it. You're going to teach it to us tomorrow. I said, no, I'm not. She said, yes, you are. Said, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. Go on. I came back. I taught Trikonasana. It was terrible. I realized I didn't know what I was doing because teaching makes you realize what you don't know. And then she forced me to teach, and I hated it every time. I would cry before teaching. I would cry after teaching. I was a terrible teacher. In fact, some years later, somebody told me that they told Robin I was a terrible teacher. And she said, just wait. She just said, just wait.
Wow.
And I didn't know that until like 10 years later. Somebody told me that story. So I started teaching. I went to India. The first year I went to India, I had somebody cover my classes when I went there. But that was just like something I did out of love and, a passion, because, I was on this other path as well to earn a living. And also I had a passion of helping people professionally and in some capacity, although it was also off the beaten track. People didn't think nutrition was important for your health and well-being. And so I came to a point when I came back from India the second time I went for a year. I got a job at the university, even though I had a PhD. It wasn't a PhD level job, but I got this job that turned out teaching people yoga and nutrition because it was what it was called then cooperative extension. Now they're hip and cool and they're called extension. It's a land grant university. Everybody has this. Every state has a land grant university. And so I would go up to Chicago and go to the South Side and teach people there who were all African American, kind of back to my roots in a sense, not really, and teach them how to cook. And I taught them yoga, and then they were like, it was called Train the Trainers program. And so then they would go out into their communities and teach cooking, healthy food, and yoga. So I did that for a year, but that wasn't my only aspect of the job. And it was a university job, and, I wasn't very satisfied with it. And I didn't really want to go into the rat race of academia. And, I had many job offers after my PhD, but I didn't do any of it. And after a year, after I talked to a good friend, I was talking to a lot of people. I was at a turning point in my life I kept saying, I don't know if I could just teach yoga. Even though I was teaching it day and night, every even though I had a full-time 40-hour-week job, I taught yoga every night. I taught yoga on weekends. I even started traveling and teaching weekends in Chicago and St. Louis. And I was saying, I don't know if I could just teach yoga because nobody did it. I mean, there were a few people, but they were the first generation of big names. I wasn't known. I was always in India, actually. I wasn't known here. And my friend said, take that word out of your sentence. Take that J-U-S-T. I don't know if I can just do yoga. Take it out of your sentence. And I said, I don't know if I can do yoga. Of course I can do yoga. I don't know if I can teach yoga. Of course I can teach it.
Yeah.
And so I took it out, and it really flipped a switch in my brain, and I took a risk, and I went to teaching full time. And it was a struggle, but then I was the only kid on the block, and I had a class full of, my beginner classes were like 40 students packed. My higher level classes had maybe 8 students or so. And then when I finally got a place of my own to teach out of instead of sharing space, that was about the same year that yoga became popular.
Wow.
When I think it was Yoga Fit. I think it was Yoga Fit that started it. And Yoga Fit started, what they did is they took people who were aerobic instructors, and in 3 days, they went to a 3-day training, and they came out a yoga instructor.
Oh.
So that was the first watering down the qualifications for a yoga teacher. And so I opened my center. Somebody actually I remember it was the summer, somebody took my class. I had just opened it. It was 1997. And then like in the fall, they opened their own yoga center 2 blocks from me. And so it started, all this competition, and now everybody and their dog is opening up yoga centers. Now with the pandemic, they're closing, but we'll see what happens. But I really struggled after that to make it. So everything I earned, especially when I started teaching outside my center, I had to fund it, because my beginner classes, I had to reduce the numbers of them I was teaching a week because there were very few students. And in those classes, the other classes started getting bigger, but people would stay generally. Although I live in a transient town, it's university town. So I don't live in a big city to get those consistent numbers. And so people, had many choices, and Iyengar Yoga practitioners, we weren't marketeers, we just put all our efforts into our practice and sharing that practice. So it was hard. So there's even statistics on this. I used to know them, but I haven't cited them for a while. But, something like 2000, the proportion of people taking Iyengar Yoga was the topmost yoga. And 15 years later, it was the bottom most.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and to me, everybody's doing Iyengar Yoga. They just don't know it.
Right.
Because the teachings of BKS Iyengar filtered through.
Right. I think a big thing that's happening in the world right now is that there are a lot of people who are essentially going to a lot of Iyengar Yoga workshops and taking the information of Iyengar Yoga and disseminating it in non-Iyengar spaces because, one, there's a realization in the world that the information is valid, but 2, people possibly don't want to get so deeply caught in the process and the rigor that it takes to actually be a certified Iyengar Yoga teacher. And so we have this thing where the information is being disseminated within the world, which objectively speaking is a good thing for the world. But how do you feel that's impacting us as a community?
How is it impacting us as a community? Well, I'm not sure I'm going to answer that directly, but see, what you described is what's happened, with this kind of everybody being a yoga teacher. My generation, when we started, we didn't want to be yoga teachers. Now you walk into a yoga center, and in a lot of places, they thrive on teacher training courses. And you walk in, you've never done yoga, and they're asking you if you want to be a teacher. Like, I don't know, does this happen in other kinds of art forms? I don't know. If I walk into an Aikido class, are they going to ask me, do I want to be a teacher?
No.
This is really something, to want to be a teacher without really even studying yoga. Even back in the days when I was driving to Ann Arbor, my little group of 3, we got beaten down for teaching already. We were like, what are you doing? You shouldn't be teaching. I remember our first trip, we cried all the way home. And then we decided, okay, we weren't really doing anything bad. We'll keep teaching. But, we made that effort to study. There was no teacher training courses. We just studied. And you picked up the teaching by that study. I always studied. People complain, oh, teacher's so far from me. It's like sometimes when I'd be teaching a workshop, my host would say, this person only shows up when you're here. And I say, well, where do you live? Why can't you have a regular teacher? I live so far. I'm like, well, how far? They're like 30 miles. And I was driving 7 hours for my teachers and then flying to the other side of the planet. So everything's relative.
Yeah.
But I have people in town, when they call up to find out about classes, where am I located? And then they say, oh, that's too far. And I'd be like, where do you live? I live in Champaign. We're Twin Cities. It takes 10 minutes to get from one city on one end, on the far end, to the other side of the far end. It was too far. So the first thing is that desire to become a yoga teacher before you've studied the subject fully. So that has impacted your original question. How has this impacted?
Well, the original question was, how do you think it's impacted us as an Iyengar Yoga community? But I do think that you're touching on something that is more universally applicable, because I'm sure not only the Iyengar Yoga community is going to see this interview. So it's this concept of, are people actually doing the groundwork and the preparation before stepping into this role of becoming yoga teachers, or before wanting to do that?
They think they are, because, they go to these training courses, and I've heard that Iyengar Yoga was the gold standard for how to train, but they couldn't get there, because the Yoga Alliance, which just says registry, it's not actually a certification. You're just registering. Mm-hmm. It's a registry. You're a registered teacher. There's no certification process, really, although I think they're trying to get to that point. I don't really know much about it, but, we started doing certification assessments back in the 90s. So we have decades of modifying our, certification process. First of all, it used to be really brutal, but now I think it's more kind and compassionate. But now even it's going to be further modified. But, and we had volunteers. We never had paid staff, so it was really hard work and a long process to try to make it, to improve this process. Whereas they just think, bam, we're going to start now a certification process, without any experience over the decades of how to improve it. Each year we would try to improve it. But anyway, people don't want to go through the certification process in our system, or they maybe don't even want to take classes with us, because we're demanding and commanding. So, you know, we don't say, oh, just go to where you're comfortable. You know, sometimes we do because we do everything, but we don't, when you're trying to progress in your path of yoga, in the asana practice and the pranayama practice, for us, reality is beyond your comfort zone.
Yeah.
I think we're the only ones who don't, you know, we will say, please, you know, distinguish between you're doing something harmful to yourself versus you're going beyond your comfort zone into the unknown. And that's hard. And that's reality. And that also, to me, develops your character and your development on many levels to go beyond. Don't learn by being comfortable. We're uncomfortable now. We're going to be uncomfortable. Everybody should, all white people, I'm sorry I'm going there.
No.
But relevant, all white people should be uncomfortable for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
You know, that we need to study and learn and go through this process of being uncomfortable ourselves with being part of a system that was inherently racist. Mm-hmm. So I think yoga, just as an example of what's going on now, helps you to step through doors that hopefully open, and just always going to your comfort zone, in my opinion, isn't going to teach you anything. But a lot of people don't want to go there. A lot of people, and Iyengar Yoga is not for everyone. Just like the Bolshoi ballet is not for everyone.
Right.
Okay. If you want to study Iyengar Yoga, be prepared to really look at yourself and learn, and to be present and quiet. We don't play music for a reason. Okay. You know, first of all, how can you teach with music? I don't know how people teach with music, but, you know, there is a whole study of yoga and sound, but that's not what people are doing. Like, you know, because I see in these other courses, like how to pick your playlist. What are you, a DJ, you know, in a nightclub? But yoga is about silence, you know? So, really, I'm not concerned. It's not my thing to be, it's not my interest. I have other things that I'm interested in to attract people from the other yogas. Okay, that's not my concern. What does concern me is the use of our paradigm or whatever, our methodology undercover, you know, because I know that, you know, when you're calling something hatha yoga alignment, that's a buzzword for, we do Iyengar Yoga, we're just not qualified to do it.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because it misrepresents actually Iyengar Yoga, because Iyengar Yoga is not alignment. BKS Iyengar, I have heard him say, Iyengar is not alignment. Of course it is, but it isn't. You're using that alignment to align the inner consciousness. And when people come to take our classes, Guruji would call them gatherers. They're not really students, they're just gatherers. They would come to us, they would gather our information so they can take it back to teach to their students. But are they actually practicing it? You know, and getting into the depth of it and fully comprehending? They're just spitting out what they gathered without any real understanding. And it's fooling people. So I don't mind that these people study with Iyengar teachers, but they can't relay what they're learning because they're not fully engaged. So it's their fault. They're missing out. And that's too bad.
Yeah.
But in terms of how it's affected Iyengar Yoga, it's affected us because just in general that we don't have a market share, and a lot of studios, because it's so diluted, a lot of studios are going to close. So we'll see who's the beacon of light, that lighthouse in this fog, a year and a half from now when things get better.
So, so Lois, for you specifically, in terms of having this long, dedicated, unbroken practice in India and continuing to have that long, dedicated, unbroken practice with India to this day, how do you think that's informed the way how you approach not just your personal sadhana, but your larger teaching of Iyengar Yoga?
Well, it's not just the long, uninterrupted practice, and it's really the study with the mother lode in Puna, India. I have never given that up, and I find that, starting in the year about 2000, I went in 1983 the first time. Around the year 2000 or so, I used to be able to still go for 4 months before that. Back in 93, I actually ended up staying 2 years, although came back here for a month for the convention that they had in 93, August of 93, and then I went back. So I actually spent 2 years there with a little break, but ironically, when I had to support myself fully from teaching, I could only spend 2 months there a year. And everybody who goes, even if they go for 1 month, they're like, oh my God, I'm just getting it now. I want to stay another month. And I have the same thing. Even after 2 months, I want to stay longer. Yeah. Even now, I had a ticket to go this June. Wow. Because when I left end of January, I was like, where I want to be. Because the Parent Institute always evolves. The teaching always evolves. Prashant said, when Light on Yoga was published, Prashant Iyengar is Guruji's son who teaches. When Light on Yoga was published in 1966, the very next day it became an antiquity. Because that's the beauty of Iyengar Yoga. It keeps progressing. It keeps evolving. And so I hope I am always expanding my consciousness with continued study. It's a lifelong study. And my heart and my soul are with that study in India. And so it affects me, yes, in my practice and hopefully my teaching.
So Lois, not only were you one of the integral forces for helping Iyengar Yoga become established in the West, but you also were vital to, in a sense, bringing a very specific part of the Iyengar Yoga teachings, which is the Iyengar Yoga approach to therapy and to yoga therapeutics, and largely being one of the major forces for those teachings in the United States of America. What is it about that aspect of Iyengar Yoga that really spoke to you so deeply for you to want to take that up as a major part of your life work with Iyengar Yoga?
Because I always was interested in helping people. And Light on Yoga, when you read it, has beneficial effects of the poses and a glossary on ailments and what you can practice for those ailments. And that was, front and center for me. Wow, I can do this and get better. And then when I went to Ann Arbor, they were teaching stuff they learned by just watching the medical classes there. They called them medical classes, and the teachers in Ann Arbor that had been there shared that. And so I learned it, and I just started doing it. And that it was just all part of the package. And it was never separate for me. And in India, when you spend, or in the early days when you spent long periods of time there, it would still be true. You couldn't take class every day. So I assisted in classes. And then they always had people in the back of the room that I wasn't conducting them. The teacher, Gita or Prashant, they were conducting the things in the back of the room. And so I learned more. And then they had 2 days a week medical classes way back. It was just all part of the package. It all went together. To me, it wasn't like a separate department of therapy. It was just, how do you help people when they can't do classic poses, do the yoga practice? And oh, by the way, they're going to get healthy too. And so I just learned trial by fire, because the medical classes were not to train you how to do yoga therapeutics. They needed you as an assistant to help conduct what they were doing. So they never really taught you, you really had to learn with experience, getting hands-on experience. And that takes a long time. Yoga therapy is really a difficult subject, but you have to approach it with the concept that just take the classic poses and how to support them for anybody to do it, And that was how Guruji even developed it, because people started coming to him. I can't walk. Well, okay, well, how do I do standing poses with someone who can't walk? Well, we can prop them up at the trestle. We could have their legs move this way, that way. They weren't going to become unparalyzed, but they would have benefited. Don't think that yoga is going to absolutely cure you. Really more about hopefully developing a practice for anyone.
I ask that because I have a lot of colleagues within Iyengar Yoga who sometimes lament the fact that they haven't been exposed to yoga therapeutics in the same way as, say, a lot of your students who are, you teach a thriving yoga therapy program. And so I think that in Iyengar Yoga, even friends who I have in Brazil and other parts of the world have commented on the fact that they haven't had the same integrated approach to learning therapeutics as a part of their overall Iyengar Yoga experience. And it has always been somewhat like another thing to do as opposed to something integrated into the whole. So I think that that's where I was coming from when I asked you about what made you pick up therapy as a specific piece. But now you've clarified and said that it's always been an integrated part of the entirety of Iyengar Yoga.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you think that today we can kind of bridge that space to make that a reality again? Because for a lot of people, it really isn't.
Well, you have to find, a teacher who's engaged in that, because even when I trained my teachers, we would go through the syllabus and develop you have the list of poses, and then you have knees, low back, neck and shoulders, common ailments, menses, pregnancy, and you had to fill in the blanks, not for healing them, but for how to include them in the class. So if somebody is doing trikonasana and their knee pains, well, lessen that weight, have them hold the rope or be against the trestle, put the forward foot up to draw that knee up so the weight bearing on that knee isn't causing any pain, and then they can still do the pose, versus more complex actually trying to heal to the best of your ability that problem. So you have, common ailments, and then you have more involved serious conditions, whatever. Yeah, so not everybody has learned it.
Yeah.
Not everybody spent long periods of time in Puna. And that's how you get it, is from the source. And so I tried to share as best I could what I've learned. And there's some history about that I don't want to actually share.
Yeah.
It was a struggle to be, I had no struggle opening and sharing, but it is important to understand Iyengar Yoga in its classic context before you take up therapy.
Yeah.
When you take up.
Yeah.
I want to learn how to heal a knee. It's like, no, you can't. And also, I think even given my biography that I shared, a little of, I also came with some other skill sets, I think, that enabled me to pick the therapy up a little bit faster maybe than most people, because I already was so physically educated from such a young age. I could feel things in my body very readily. And I also, in my mental health work, I trained to be a counselor. Even my senior year of college, I spent a year at the community health center, and I had a mentor who taught me family counseling, individual counseling, even though I had a bachelor's degree in psychology. I was actually in I was the second class. It was a new experimental program. It was the 70s, where it was called mental health workers program, where they trained you to do psychological counseling without an actual degree in it. And I did it, so I learned how to really get information from people and listen to them. And so, I try to teach this. It's a skill set you have to develop. And it takes a long time to watch and observe bodies that I became interested in. It was almost overwhelming. I can't do it anymore because it pains me so much. If I'm walking, when I was in the late 70s, early 80s, when I first learned, I'd start walking down the street and saying, oh my God, they have a shoulder problem. Wow, they have scoliosis. Oh, wow, that limp shows that comes from the ankle. I started seeing people all over and really learning to look and see. And if you just come in and say, I want to learn therapeutics, you can't teach that so easily. It's like a lifetime, the other person, the best person is Stephanie Quirk. She spent 20 years doing that, really seeing. And she also has a background. She was a psychiatric nurse. So she had a medical background in psychiatry. I had one, so I don't think that's a mere coincidence. So, yeah. So the best thing is, find a teacher. I know they're few and far between because not every teacher that's not their interest.
Right.
And it's hard work. That's part of it. Running a therapy class, and it's hard work. It's a lot of physical work, and it's exhausting. You break your body, actually. I think physical therapists go through this too, because some physical therapists might be hauling and lifting heavy bodies a lot. You break your body. You can't keep doing that a lifetime. Even massage therapists, some of them cannot last a lifetime of always manipulating, physically people's bodies. It takes a toll. People, I hankered after it in my early years, but I looked at the light on yoga, I studied it, and then I went to somebody who knew it. Even though it was 7 hours. So I'm not going to hear anybody's sob story. There's nobody here. You find them and you make a way to go. And I wasn't, financially so independent. I had a period of starvation where we were going through a drought here. I was in grad school and really was down to no money. And I have a vegetable garden, and we were on water restriction orders. And my neighbor marched over because he saw me watering. I'm like, this is my only food I have to eat because I can't afford to pay for food. I am watering my garden. So,
Wow.
I just, it depends on how bad you want it. And if you're willing, if you're able to have the tenacity to do a long-term process of learning that information.
Yeah. And as I hear you say that, Lois, it reminds me of something that I heard Geeta say, and I'm not sure whether or not it was on the Iyengar Yoga movie or somewhere else, but the point that she was making was that we need to stop thinking about Iyengar Yoga as Iyengar Yoga therapeutics and Iyengar Yoga asana practice, because essentially if you learn Iyengar Yoga asana practice fully and you really take that knowledge into your body, your practice becomes imbued with a healing potential without you necessarily establishing a separate therapeutic practice for yourself. And I think that that is really one of the greatest things that Iyengar Yoga has inbuilt within it, that if you allow yourself to inculcate this systematic intelligence that Iyengar Yoga actually is, it becomes a therapeutic process without you necessarily having to think that they're two separate things.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
That's a good statement.
All right, Lois, final thing I want to ask you about is you not so recently published an article, and it was something that was circulated all throughout the Iyengar Yoga community, but it was really on this concept of teachers in general needing to teach from a place of their practice as opposed to teaching from a script, or as opposed to teaching from an inauthentic, almost mechanical sort of way. Can you talk a bit about the content of that article and why you think it's important for us to have that understanding within us as we continue to move forward with our Iyengar Yoga practice and teaching?
Was that the "We Don't Know How to Teach" article?
I was.
Well, I think your interpretation of that article is giving me more credit than actually what I wrote. It was a little different, but okay, I'll take that credit because it's true.
I was trying. I was trying not to call it the "We Don't Know How to Teach" article.
Okay, we don't. I don't know how to teach, but I just try. And the main thing to try comes from the story of when I went with Patricia Walden, another great teacher, practitioner, to Puna the year before Guruji died, because he was already so close to death, and I wanted to ask him, what are we going to do when you're no more? I mean, we both spent 40 years studying. We went together and we put that question to him. And he didn't answer the question as far as we were concerned. He spent an hour and a half going over his life story, okay? And after an hour and a half, he was only on 1968 or something. And Patricia and I had already been making eyes at each other, like we're just not getting our answer. And so Patricia tried to say something to try to get the answer. It didn't work. He kept going. Maybe went to 1970. And finally, I just really wanted this answer. I was so desperate for my answer that I just bluntly said, because in the beginning, the question was more, I mean, I kind of started with 3 sort of statements leading nicely, like kindly to ask, what are we going to do when you're no more? But I didn't exactly say it that way, but tried to make it clear. Because I don't want to just bluntly ask this great teacher, what are we going to do when you're dead? So then I just put my hand on the table and I just interrupted him. And I said, Guruji, what are we going to do when you're no more? And he was kind of, he was taken aback. He was surprised, but he quickly knew what to say. And he said, when you practice with integrity. And when you teach, observe your students. That's it. That answers your question.
Wow.
Those are meaningful. That's simple and profound. And it was also, there's a few things that happened after that I'm not going to delve into now.
Yeah.
But reflecting on that whole experience, I realized when he was telling his life story, that I have heard and read so many times. In fact, one time for one of his birthdays publications, he asked me to do his biography, and I had to research it more, and then I interviewed him. So I knew his life story, although when he told it again, there were some things I didn't know. So the message, his answer was also in his life story, because he had so many obstacles in his way of his sadhana, his practice, and developing how to share it with the world, to bring his love of yoga to the world. There were so many obstacles that he almost gave up. We would have given up. We would have given up. And even now, when we're going through this pandemic, I'm looking at his birth, because he always started with his life story is, I was born during the 1918 pandemic. It has new meaning now, doesn't it? When you think about that, I was like, oh yeah, you start the violins. He was born in the year 1918, when 50 million people died around the world.
Yeah.
And think about that. And I know his mother was sick with it. Because it lasted 2 years, just like this one's going to last. So now that has new meaning. He was born in those circumstances. And then at one point, there were so many things that happened to him. At one point, in a place he was teaching, people were envious of him for whatever reason. They didn't like him. And they burned his room with all his props and things. And he was penniless. He went to Puna with 4 annas in his pocket. They don't even have 4 annas these days. It wasn't worth anything back then. It's non-existent now. They have rupees, but there was less than a rupee called an anna. He went to Puna with 4 annas in his pocket. And to them, he's a foreigner in Puna, So he really struggled, and they burned his place down. If somebody set fire to my yoga studio intentionally, I'm not sure I would rebuild, especially not having any money. There was no insurance to cover what they did and the hurt and pain of that,
Wow.
So his life story is the message, actually. So when I reflected, I kind of felt bad. I should have listened. I should have let him go up to present time. But still, I felt like that was a great answer. That was the best. Look at his life, he was a special person. He persevered in adversity, and his love was yoga. And we got that gift that he shared with the world.
Lois, I think that that's really profound for us all as teachers, especially that final piece of observing your students, because I think that there's a tendency today with a lot of us who are certified Iyengar Yoga teachers who go through that process where we want to pass the test so much that oftentimes that point of observation, it moves to the back burner because we're trying to sound the way how we're supposed to sound. We're trying to look the way how we're supposed to look. We're trying too hard to be something that is essentially inauthentic and that doesn't actually connect with the heart or the passion that fuels our love of Iyengar Yoga. And I think that if we come back and we peel back to this piece of practice with integrity, then there's never the opportunity for us, whether it's assessment or whether it's just regular teaching, there's never the opportunity there for us to be anything other than who we are. Because if we're practicing from a place of integrity, all we will show is ourselves. And if we're also practicing from a place where we're observing our students, then all we will show is the care and the compassion that comes out of that process, which isn't a show, it's not a performance, it's essentially a call and a charge to be present. And I mean, what more can we ask for of ourselves than to be present with the people who we care about and especially to be present when those people are our students. So thank you very much for sharing that, because I had never heard that.
Welcome.
Okay, Lois Steinberg, today was absolutely extraordinary, and I will even say amazing, even though I know that you think that that's a highly overused word because of the person who works at your food co-op and her overuse of that word.
Awesome.
Oh, awesome.
I always say the Grand Canyon's awesome.
So, okay, well then, cool. I'm in the clear. This was
awesome now. They're all in PTSD with everything.
Yeah.
Everybody's on edge. If you say anything to anybody who are, working at the grocery stores,
Yeah.
like anything, they're just in trauma.
Yeah. But this was genuinely amazing, Lois, and I'm so grateful that we finally got a chance to do this. And please tell our listeners and viewers where they can find contact points for you, because after the world is born again, we're definitely going to be coming back to Shampoo Banana to be with you again. So please tell our listeners and viewers where they can find contact point for you online during these times.
yoga-cu.com.
Okay. And there is also a loissteinberg.com.
Yeah, you can click on my name on that site too.
Yeah. So I will put all the contact information down below in the description box for those of you who want to know more about Lois, and also more about her publications, which we haven't even spoken about today. But Lois is the author of several books that specifically address Iyengar Yoga, asana alternatives, and yoga therapy for those of you who are interested. And I'll also put that information down below. So Lois Steinberg, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for sharing space with us today. And thank you for being who you are and for being a light and a lighthouse for so many of us. You mean the world to us, and we love you.
The bottom of my feet.
You're welcome. And for those of you who have tuned in today, please do like this video and subscribe to it, and please share it with your other friends and colleagues within the yoga community, whether it's the Iyengar Yoga community or it's the larger yoga world. Please do like, subscribe, share this video so that more and more people can have access to these amazing interviews. Until next time, thank you so much, dear listeners and viewers, from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of Lois's feet. And until next time, be well, stay safe. We love you. Talk to you soon.